Hi, I'm Selena, and today we're going to be doing a triple review. Specifically, the books I'm going to be reviewing are Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, Peace and Turmoil by Elliot Brooks, and Across the Greengrass Fields by Shauna McGuire. So this is a new series I'm going to start on my channel called Weekly Reviews. Basically, I've wanted to do more reviews for a while, especially because I'm going to be reading more fantasy, and I love reviewing fantasy, and I would like to document my journey into adult high fantasy and expanding my taste past Sanderson. And so I'm going to be doing more reviews, but I don't want to dedicate most of my YouTube videos to reviews because I know not everyone likes them, and I also feel like there's a lot more content I want to make and I can only post so many times a week, so I'm going to shove all of my reviews off until Sunday for that week, and each Sunday, hopefully, approximately, almost every Sunday, you'll be getting a weekly review video where I review 2 or 3 of the books that I have been reading and have finished by the time of filming that review. So this week's I'm going to be doing Spinning Silver, Peace and Turmoil, and Across the Greengrass Fields. If you would like to skip around, I'll have timestamps. You'll be able to tell that the video is split into parts, and so you can just skip to whatever books you care about and skip the ones you don't. I'm not going to be reviewing every book I read, but I am going to be reviewing more than I used to because I feel more confident in that now. And sometimes I will be doing like just dedicated reviews to a single series or something like a book talk, but I'm gonna try and keep those to a minimum because they're just not very time effective or video making effective. I don't know. So yeah, this is my first one of these, so we'll see how it goes. Also, just a warning, I am going to be going into like not spoilers, but I am going to be giving you a little bit more detail about the plots of each of these books because these are reviews, and so if you're not into that, I would just skip this if you haven't read them yet. Let's just get started with the first book, and that first book is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. Okay, so Spinning Silver is an adult fairy tale fantasy. It's kind of Rumpelstiltskin inspired, but I'll get into that later. And it technically can also qualify as portal fantasy. To me, I definitely qualify this as portal fantasy, but it is mostly like fairy tale fantasy or fantasy inspired by fairy tales and told like a fairy tale. So this was a 5-star book. I gave Spinning Silver 5 stars, and I was so not expecting that because I've had this book for a while. I've had it for probably about a year at this point, and I don't even know why I bought it, but I heard someone talk about it really positively, and it piqued my interest again. Like I had already been interested in it, but I had no immediate plans to read it or buy it. And then I heard someone recommend it, and I just put it higher up on my TBR, and then I didn't get to it once I bought it. So I kind of think of this book as like a long extended fairy tale. That's really what it felt like, or maybe like 3 fairy tales that all kind of intertwine. Because we follow 3 different perspectives and their stories very much interact and intersect. And basically because this book's plot is so like sprawling and just very, I don't know, very like kind of narratively driven, it's sort of like a fairy tale where like this happens and then this happens and then this happens and everything like leads to another thing. I can only really tell you where we start with each of the 3 women. So the first, and I would say the principal main character that we meet, is Miriam, who is the daughter of a moneylender in her town in like Eastern Europe. And her father, who's a moneylender, is really bad at his job. He doesn't collect money. They are living in poverty. And so basically, Miriam takes over and actually starts collecting people's debts fairly, but she is, getting money for her family. But she becomes so good at it that she basically attracts the attention of the Stark, which are these basically ice fae creatures that live in their own world that sort of overlaps with the human world. But they do come into the human world and raid for gold every like winter or so. The Stark ask her, or basically task her with changing the Stark silver they give her into gold. And you may have heard that this is like a Rumpelstiltskin inspired or retelling or something, and this is really the plotline that speaks to that, but there are similarities to it, but it really is not such a retelling that it never goes anywhere different. I don't know, it has a lot. It takes elements of a lot of fairy tales, but that's probably the best way to describe it. It's more inspired rather than a direct retelling. The second character we follow is Wanda, and Wanda is the oldest child of her very abusive and just very violent father. And so she is sent to work with Miriam to basically pay her father's debt off faster, but Wanda is actually really okay with this arrangement because she sort of sees it as a way to escape her like pretty devastating life. And then the third perspective we follow is that of Irina, who is this she's the daughter of a duke, I believe, in a nearby like town or city or something, and she's supposed to be married off soon, and that's pretty much all I want to say about her. And as you can tell with those summaries, only Miriam's summary that I just gave you, or the place Miriam starts, is only really readily apparent that like it's going to be a magical fairy tale story, and they all have magic in them. They all have different magics that sort of tie together into one, but I feel like it's a spoiler to talk too much about those other two perspectives, so I'm not going to. And then the magic in this world, since this is kind of an extended fairy tale, as I said, we do have, like, the way magic is portrayed is not quite like magical realism. Like, it's not magical realism in that magic is just a part of the world and no one blinks an eye when it's introduced and it used to describe other things. Like, that's not it. But it's used in the very fairy tale way where there's magic that's in the world, but not everyone has access to that magic. And so it is still kind of rare when it shows up and kind of feared by a lot of people, but it also isn't necessarily super shocking and a whole revelation when magic is coming into the lives of normal people. There's a dark whimsy to this story that I loved, and it just worked so well for me. And I think that does come from this being kind of an adult fairy tale. This is a very atmospheric read with a very stunning, like wintry cold atmosphere, but it also is a stunning plot, in my opinion. It's definitely a character-driven book, like don't get me wrong about that, it definitely is character-driven, but the way the plots all sort of intricately tie together and intersect is masterful, in my opinion, and so I really, really enjoyed this plot, even though it takes a while to get going and even though it is super, super character driven. Since it is a character driven book, it is more slightly like slower to get going, and it's not easy to describe the plot. The plot we do have is pretty much entirely pushed by character decisions, character actions, characters changing their own lives and making choices, and I really, really enjoyed that. The characters really do push the story along, and I thought that those pushes happened at exactly the right time. There was only like one part sort of towards the end where I was a little bit bored, and I think that that's because the plot at that point seemed like it was sort of getting out of the characters' hands a little too much, and I was like, okay, so what are we gonna do now? But then they sort of took the reins really quickly back again, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the ending of this after that part. So we are really close to the character perspectives because this is told in first person. We really do get everyone's thoughts. There's a lot of description in this book, but it is sort of, I really enjoyed the description, and I don't really enjoy like heavy description, but it is also filtered through the characters' minds, and so you really are in their heads. The problem that can make this a little bit confusing is because it is told in first person and we switch perspectives of not just the three main characters, but later we start adding other perspectives who never get as much time as the three main characters, but we do sort of get glimpses of how they see the plots they're in. And there's usually a break in the page when this happens, or a break in the chapter, of course, but there isn't a name, like there's no indication outside of the text itself that whose head we're in, and it takes like context clues to really help you figure it out. And with the audiobook, it was a little bit confusing, but it only lasted like a few lines, and I was, you know, I figured it out pretty quickly, and it didn't really detract from my enjoyment. In fact, I really, really liked that style because I'd never seen it done before, and I thought she did it really well. My only other criticism that sort of made this not as much of a 5-star as it could have been is basically, in true extended fairy tale fashion, we sort of would lead up to a thing and then the story wouldn't be over, and then we'd lead up to another thing and then the story wouldn't be over. And so it always felt like we were at what should have been the climax, and then there was more. And the first couple times that happened, it was really interesting because it was like, oh, so clearly this isn't the whole plot. There's clearly more here I'm excited to see. But after it started happening towards the end, I wasn't like ready for the story to finish, but it started to feel a little aimless to me, even though I understand with context that it wasn't aimless. That's just how it felt to me. It felt almost like, so what are we gonna do now? And it felt like there was some narrative switches that came on a little too quickly and maybe didn't have enough time to resolve. I don't know. But basically that was pretty much over pretty quickly because I loved the ending of this book. I thought it was really, really good. And I super enjoyed this ending. I really love this book. I highly recommend this if you like atmospheric books, if you like fairy tales, if you like character-driven stories, and especially if you like to see character-driven stories about women. And specifically, one of the things I loved about this, I didn't put this in my notes, but I'm gonna say it right now, is the women in this story all took agency in very small ways. Like, not necessarily small, but they were all able to like save themselves and navigate the world. And it wasn't always a complete victory. Like, they would take some hits and then still fight for themselves in really important ways, in very subtle ways, and I really enjoyed that. And so if that sounds appealing to you, if you like those sort of stories, especially with women or with people who tend to have less power in the world, I highly recommend this. I cannot recommend this story enough. I was not expecting to love it this much, and I did. Okay, switching gears into the next review of this video. The second book I'm going to talk about is Peace and Turmoil by Elliot Brooks. So this is an adult high fantasy. Actually, it's written by a fellow booktuber, and since I'm technically, I guess, sort of a booktuber, I guess I just have to say, like, even though this wouldn't affect like reviewers' reviews, really, I feel like a lot of us can separate our personal feelings from books. I don't know Elle. I've never talked to Elle. I do watch Elle's channel. I really like her channel, and I started watching around the time that this book came out because I was hyped for it. But the only reason I picked this up is because I was interested in it. That's the only reason you'll catch me picking up a book, unless it was like forced upon me by a friend or school. So yeah. Now that that disclaimer is out of the way, let's just get to the review. So this is a highly political book with a, in my opinion, like a fast-paced plot that is split up into basically 5 phases. Comparing it to something like Way of Kings, which is over here, even though I don't think they're much alike, but they are split into like 5 parts. Way of Kings is obviously much longer and much slower, but taking something like Way of Kings, which sort of intertwines 3 plots of what could be really 3 separate novels and like a bunch of other little novella short story threads in it as well. Peace and Turmoil is more like one big plot with a lot of legs to it and looked at from a lot of different perspectives. Like by the end of it, I could really see that 2 characters' perspectives were never totally separate from one another. Whereas in Way of Kings, like, it really does sort of feel like that. That's how it was written. So this plot is hard to describe because there's kind of a lot going on, and I don't want to go too into it. But basically, it's basically a political drama between these several countries on this landmass called the Dark Shores, which have been a pretty stable peace for the last 30 years or so, I think. And basically that is kind of being interrupted at this point. Basically all the drama sort of revolves around this dagger on the front cover and basically other objects of power like that. There are objects of power in those worlds, and they all are sort of in different places in different people's hands. And specifically the dagger, there are people who want the dagger in their hands and someone else's hands than the person whose hands it is in, and some people want it out of their own hands, out of their own country. And so we all have a lot of people sort of vying for it or just like trying to get it to where they think it should be. And that's kind of like a very simplified version of the driving plot because there's kind of, as I said, a lot of legs to it, and I don't want to spoil anything. I am going to say a little bit about our 4 main perspectives though. We follow Dietrich of Sedai, Guinevere of Zenith, Roland of Messedia, and Zodia of Eve. And I will warn you once again, like, I am going to get a little specific with the characters and where their plots start, so I don't want to spoil anything. You can skip a few times if you don't want to hear it. So Dietrich of Sedai, his country is relatively stable at this point, but also probably one of the more unstable ones because they have just sort of, in the last 30 years, come out of being enslaved to another country. And basically, in order to protect the stability of this country, Dietrich, who is an assassin prince, he's been trained as an assassin, is tasked with stealing the dagger to help his country, basically, at this specific event. At the same event, Guinevere is tasked with finding a husband, but that task is a little bit more involved than it may seem, and all of these are. Roland's perspective is kind of hard to describe without getting into too many details, I feel like, but he's basically sent to investigate some rebellions going on within his kingdom. And then Zodia is from the land of Eve, which is actually across the ocean from a lot of these different places. She's not a part of the landmass called the Dark Shores. Eve is somewhere else, and she's only come to the Dark Shores because she's seen visions of ruin for the Dark Shores as a whole, and so she's here. That's all I can say, like, summary-wise, but I can say that this was fun, fast-paced, in my opinion. It had a little bit of a slow start, but it really picked up, like really picked up, and it was so enjoyable. And it got a lot darker than I was expecting. Like, it went places I was not expecting it to go. This book has relatively short chapters, which in my opinion made the pacing faster and easier. It made them easier to get through, and especially in the middle of action, we sometimes do flip back from perspectives that are connected really quickly. And sometimes that can feel, I'm sure for some people that would feel a little jarring. For me, it actually increased the tension because it dragged out moments that would have lasted maybe a page. And so I really enjoyed that. I really immediately connected with some of the perspectives. I really liked Guinevere from the start, but the others it took me a little bit longer to get invested in, and I was really invested by the end. Dietrich in particular was a little bit harder for me to get invested in, but the others I enjoyed a lot more immediately, but I liked his perspective. There were some like character choices which I didn't think completely fit what I was getting from Dietrich specifically, but otherwise the characters were pretty well established. There's a lot of legs to this plot, as I've said about Spinning Silver as well, but this one, it's kind of like there's a big plot with a lot of different threads in it, and I would definitely say that this is a plot-driven story. The reason I say that is because, to me, there are times when characters make really important choices and that pushes the plot forward. They have agency in their plots, but a lot of the plot does sort of happen. It feels like it happens a little bit outside of them, and it sort of forces their hands. I think it's done really well. I enjoy plot-driven stories, but if you're more of a character-driven reader, then I think there will be stuff in here for you too, because you are in close perspectives with the characters and you do get to watch them make choices. It's not done badly by any means. They're not just pulled around because plot convenience, in my opinion. But yeah, if you were expecting something a little bit more character-driven, that to me is not that. But it's a really fun, fast-paced plot that I enjoyed. There were some writing / like editing mistakes that sort of pulled me out of the story a little bit, but I'm not like a huge person who pays attention to like small grammatical or writing details, and it only happened a couple of times, and so I'm very forgiving of that stuff. And overall, I found Elliot Brooks's writing style really readable and quick to fly through. I feel like I can't blanket recommend this just because I haven't read that much high fantasy to compare this to other than like Sanderson. But I gave it 4.5 stars because I really enjoyed it. I feel like I will get better at recommending and knowing what high fantasy to recommend to what people as I review more of it, but as it is, I haven't read that much in the genre. Video coming about that soon. So I feel like I can't like fully recommend this book to people who have read more than me. Although if it sounds like your thing, like if it sounds like something you would like with cool characters, fast-paced fun plot, lots of political intrigue, and different sort of threads of politics coming together, countrywide struggles for power, basically. If that sounds like you may really like this book. And I know I did. I gave it 4.5 stars and I can't wait for book 2, so yeah. Moving on to the third and final book I'm going to review in this video, Across the Greengrass Fields by Shauna Maguire. So this is a young adult portal fantasy. It is number 6 in the Wayward Children series. I've seen a lot of hype for the first like 3-ish books on BookTube, but I feel like a lot of the people who were hyping them sort of like gave up on them. Maybe I'm just watching the wrong people, but I haven't given up on them even though the series has been sort of hit or miss for me. This series as a whole is basically about children that go to their own personal magical worlds that really suit their personalities and are kind of their own personal homes. Earth is not really their home. Other things like a fairyland or the underworld or something like that are their homes. And they're basically all kind of spit back out eventually. And when they are, they often end up at the home for wayward children. I don't remember who the teacher's name is, but basically it's this home for a bunch of kids who've all had the same experience of being spit out of their worlds and haven't really been able to reintegrate into their society since. And they just sort of are there with people who understand and kind of wait for their doors to show up if they ever do again. The books in the series alternate so that like the odd numbered ones take place at this school and some hijinks going on there, and then the even numbered ones take place like in various magical worlds. You see sort of the origin story of a lot of the students that we've seen before at the schools and what their time was like in their magical world. This is book 6, so even number. We followed a girl named Reagan who basically wanders into her magical world, which is called Hooflands, and it's basically just a world with pretty much every horse-type creature you could imagine. Unicorns, centaurs, kelpies, you know the deal. So I liked Reagan as a character, but I was a little bit like, why are we getting this story? Because she's not from any of the other books. At least I haven't seen her. Maybe she's like a very quick side character. And so I didn't already have that attachment to her going in. With a lot of the characters that have had origin stories, I've usually developed some sort of attachment to them and know about their magical world and really want to see it. With Reagan, I didn't have that because I'd never seen her before, or maybe I just missed her. I don't know. And I'm also biased because I pretty much ever since I met the character of Cade in book 1, I've been waiting for his backstory. We've gotten a lot of it in the like regular series, but I just want to see it happen because I feel like that could be so good. I did grow an attachment to Reagan, and I did really feel for her struggles with gender. Reagan is an intersex character. She's also a girl. That is the identity she knows that she is, and she is forced to sort of question that for a second until it's explained to her, and then she lives in a world that will always question her. So there was a lot of exploration in that, and so it was really, really interesting. So I was on board with Reagan within the first like 50 pages or something. I don't know, I read this on audiobook, but the plot was really not compelling to me. I just did not care that much. I find that this is the case with a lot of the stories. I do think that this book had a plot, which is more than I can say for some of these books, but the plot just wasn't super compelling. I didn't care that much about whatever Reagan was supposed to do at her world, and honestly, like a lot of the book was just her getting to know people in the world, and I didn't care much about that either. I don't want to say too much, but basically it felt like we didn't use the page time wisely, and it just wasn't interesting to me. But usually with the series, even if I can't connect to the characters, which I did with this one, and even if I can't connect to the plot, which I didn't with this one, I can usually connect with the world. I just didn't really connect with this world very much. I think that I love magical creatures, but I think I also I never had like a horse girl phase or something. So, and like no offense if you did at all, like that's fine, but like that was just never me. I was honestly scared of horses as a kid, and so like this like obsession with horses that Reagan has, and I'm sure like the obsession that birthed this world, I just didn't have it, and it was okay. I liked seeing the creatures, but it's not my favorite iteration of them, and I don't know, I wasn't charmed by this world like I was so many others, or I wasn't creeped out by this world like I was with others, so I just didn't care that much about the world. But yeah, my connection with the character pretty much carried me through this really short story. The plot didn't connect with me, the world didn't connect with me. It was okay, it was fine. It was a 3-star. All right, thank you for watching this weekly triple review. It won't always be a triple review, but thank you for watching this one. I hope that you enjoyed this. Let me know if you've read any of these books and what you thought, or if my reviews made you want to pick any up or not want to pick any up, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.